Denmark is a little country town on the southern coast of Western Australia with a population of approximately 5,000. It's a fantastic place to live. An obvious benefit to living here is the magnificent natural environment, but the town itself is quaint and unspoiled, still has that small country town feel. Most of the businesses are still your standard traditional grocery store, with all the things that a good farmer needs. In many ways it has stayed the same for a long time, which is part of its appeal. This is the Denmark that many people know and love, but it wasn't always like this. The town that I grew up in was a very different place. This is a story about a little town that changed its identity, told by some of the people who helped to change that identity, who helped shape the face of Denmark as we know it today. It's also interwoven with my story, because the town that I love now, I didn't so much when I was younger. And I believe that those bloody hippies are part of the reason we have such a great place to live in today.
Way down south amongst the trees, buzzing around with the honeybees, are some cats who hold the keys. The cats is swinging from the trees. And deep in the heart of the Rainbow Coast, there is a place that's got the most. Got a lot of green, green trees to boast. Well, let's take this time to raise a toast to the good, good news that we're bringing. Our freedom's bells, hear them ringing. Whoa, we're singing. And you know that the cats is swinging, swinging from the tree.
In 1979 I was living, working in Fremantle, self-employed, not getting enough work, very young children, and clearly a change was a good thing. There were many people from quite a few places in the world who, for all kinds of reasons, mostly by accident, were discovering Denmark and ending up building, living, having their kids, finding themselves in a different way.
For my own well-being, I needed to leave behind the city and also a relationship and come and live in a rural country town with a community that I was already familiar with and felt that I could make a whole new beginning to a new life.
And living in a suburban home, and I knew that it wasn't actually, didn't match my values, and I wondered what I was doing. Young, feminist, activist, 2 children at home in a suburb.
I was an escapee from the advertising industry in the city. I'd got to a stage where I was looking at people 10 years my senior thinking, God, I could end up like them, I've got to get out of here. And I was actually driving to Walpole and I came across that bridge and thought, what's this, Denmark? Never heard of it. Wonder what this is all about. That was the end of that. And I was one of the first captives of Denmark, one of the first people, I learned later, to fall under the spell, which is that you don't choose Denmark, Denmark chooses you.
I wanted to be engaged. That's why I came here, because I wanted to be fully engaged in my life and the community around me and have an impact, I suppose.
My parents said this is a gorgeous, gorgeous place, and my sister lived here. And so we came to Denmark. We were leaving one country because of the political strife and coming to peace.
We were escaping a life that was intolerable and went totally against what we all believed in. And we're looking for a free country with free people. And we were told Australia was free, a free country with beautiful people, and they were racially tolerant. I looked it up in an encyclopedia, and there was a little paragraph about Denmark saying it was cold and bleak, but it had the tallest trees, and it had the widest range of wildflowers in Australia, and possibly the world. And I thought, well, okay, that gives me a good reason to come here.
I was working in a nuclear power station in the UK, and I was literally terrified of the place. and I was living within 2 k's of it. And one day, after we had an emergency, I looked at the globe and I went, that's where we're going. And I came to Denmark and it was passing down with rain. And I thought, what a lovely place. My wife thought it was horrible because it was raining, but I thought, wow, all these trees, this is great.
Denmark Town was founded for the timber that was taken from its lush surrounding forests of Karri to form its first major industry. In its early history, the town went from timber milling to farming and back to milling again, experiencing several waves of change in between. My parents moved to Denmark from suburban Perth in 1967. I was 4 years old. They bought a 200-acre property, and although they weren't alternative lifestylers, they were amongst the first tree changes the district had seen. Educated, working-class cityites looking for a break and choosing the town as opposed to being born and bred here.
There's myself and Bob, my husband, 5 kids, 5 cows, 5 calves, and assorted chooks and turkeys. The main reason we came was almost, I think, to be like the hippies, to be self-sufficient. Well, that was my idea anyway. We could grow our own food and just live on the farm and not have to rely too much on buying things at the supermarket.
When I was a kid, we lived on a farm and didn't go into town much. We were like many people in those days, a 1-car family, so the big weekly outing was to town on a Saturday morning. The town was made up of farmers, mill workers and the occasional surfer. I'd heard stories about hippies during my childhood, but I'd never really encountered them. This was a hard time economically for the town, as it was for most of the country. Shops were being closed down and boarded up, and people lived in fear of the mill closing and wondering what would become of their little town without its biggest economic base. The town needed something else to replace the milling and to compensate for the over-reliance on farming. Now, this also happened to be about the time when the alternative lifestylers first started coming to Denmark.
When we came to Denmark, it was a dying town. The young people were leaving. The population was at about 1,500 and falling. And it had done, the apple industry had collapsed. I think about a month after we got here, the old steam-powered Whittaker's mill on Ocean Beach Road closed down, and there were like 70 jobs just went there. So the population was under so that pressure of a decline.
It was a quiet rural town where some tourists came, where there were caravan parks, like Ocean Beach Caravan Park, which were mostly completely empty, amazing beaches that nobody seemed to go to. And in winter, it was like the town died.
Denmark was far away from everything, very inward, very isolated, and the people who lived here, the local people, were quite afraid and really had barriers about newcomers, we were called, and other less flattering terms were used. But yeah, it was very inward looking, and they didn't want change, and they definitely didn't want people from other places.
And they felt that the newcomers were coming in and taking over their town.
I mean, we were known as the Hippies of Harewood Road. That was our label.
My favourite characters back then was old Jack Ricketts. Anyone, just about anybody under 25 or under 40 or maybe under 50 who he didn't know intimately or hadn't seen around for some years was a hippie. Anyone who had an idea that was a bit different or was likely to rock the boat was a hippie.
And there was the sort of rednecks from the mill and the farmers, and of course, as you say, as the surfies and the hippies. And people did delineate themselves quite very often just by the way they dressed and what they drove. And if you didn't have a surfboard on your four-wheel drive, you're bound to be a redneck,
I think that there was, certainly when you read all the newspapers and things like that, most of the locals were terrified about what impact these strange people were going to have.
Many of them were just dropouts. Most of us were brought up to work 8 hours, or at least 8 hours, and then and so we saw them perhaps as initially as a threat to our way of life.
As you were milking cows and feeding pigs and playing football and tennis in the summer, and they were around, but they didn't really. I was much too busy to be bothered with a lot of them. But you did notice them because a lot of them were long-haired and long dresses and no shoes.
All of a sudden we were very aware of this group of people that moved in. Looked pretty scruffy, certainly dressed differently, had a wonderful layback style of looking on life. My mother actually said that she believed that they all came out of the woodwork and the forests, and they did.
And I can remember the first 1 or 2 summers we worked for Bill Brennan at the Carry High, the original roadhouse, if you like, and that had the only place you could really get a cup of coffee, which was instant coffee in a plastic mug. Every lunchtime we would get I think it was a purple Monaro would drive up to the roadhouse, and these 2 young strapping blokes would hop out, and we would know that they were here for their lunch, and before they'd come through the door we'd have on the counter for them a pie, a Coke and a packet of Marlboro. Their mother was quite involved sort of Christian woman in town who was quite vocal about these new people coming in, destroying, with their influences, destroying the whole sort of social fabric and lifestyle of Denmark.
The new arrivals in their great escape aspired to the values of community, subsistence lifestyles and creative living. Whilst some of these qualities were already apparent in the small town, the new arrivals also brought with them anti-mainstream alternative ideas.
So what were these bearded, long-haired Indian cotton people that were moving in? How could they do it? How could they survive?
A lot of resentment that the newcomers were changing things. They weren't just fitting in, they were actively changing and imposing their values.
A lack of understanding. We dressed differently. We were full of bubbles. We weren't seen to be working, and everybody here was working very hard and getting next to nothing. We didn't understand that.
I avoided places like the pub. I was quite careful, became quite careful at the type of businesses I would use and so on, because I knew some of them were highly hostile to the greenies or to the alternative culture, inverted commas.
There was a dichotomy in the approach that locals took to newcomers, particularly newcomers with long hair. They either ignored you and probably talked about you behind your back, or they saw, a single man. Let's weave him into the fabric of this society. And so I had a mixture of being ignored and being invited to all sorts of functions that, sort of country dance type functions, which were fabulous. I met quite a lot of the establishment people then.
We really didn't get eye contact with the people in the street. It felt like, we didn't belong there, and we didn't mind because we had our own little world out in the bush. We were called hippies, but we weren't hippies. Because the hippies come from the 60s in America, with peace, love and brown rice and that sort of a thing, and dope and free sex. I mean, we went into that. Free sex, gut.
We were really keen to be self-sufficient. Back in the 70s, we were all going, the end of the world is nigh. We've got to get somewhere where we can be on our own bit of land, somewhere where we can have a cow and a sheep and spin and knit and make all our own cheese and grow all our own stuff. And we bought a property out just off Scottsdale Road. We're going to have, that was going to be it. And then some of the neighbours, they actually saw me with my top off as they drove past one day. They were, nudists! I don't want my 17-year-old daughter looking at nudists. Oh!
Many of them, were people that had just wanted to get away from the cities as they had been developed, and all sorts of. I think it was the start of a cultural change for Denmark.
By the age of 15, I was dying to get out of this one-horse town. I hated it. To me, it was as dead as a doornail. It was 1981 when I left for the big smoke. The population of Denmark had increased to about 1,900 people, but I wasn't looking back over my shoulder. I was off to find myself and the rest of the world. I was 17 years old and I thought I was leaving Hicksville for good. I went from being a small town country girl to living in Melbourne, trying to find myself and the rest of the world. I went to uni, travelled around the world, made a bit of art. The people I met inspired me. Life was exciting. I was hanging out in the theatre, going to nightclubs, doing yoga, living in shared houses and meeting some pretty way out people. Students, artists, musicians, actors, protesters, journalists, fashion designers and healers. So I wasn't all that keen on going back to Denmark. When I did go back for family visits, I noticed things starting to change. The kinds of people I was meeting in Melbourne were starting to appear here in my old hometown.
And we did the usual pioneering thing, scraping together to build a house and start gardens. We had 2 children at that stage, so it was pretty much the hard slog of the pioneer, you know, the new age pioneer, if you like.
I was increasingly thinking, why are we here? And then we got to the place where we were going to live, and I definitely wondered why I was there when we got there, because it was out in the bush at Kent River. But we did sell everything electrical, because I knew I was going to go and be a farmer. Subsistence farmer, that lasted about a month.
It was a good 2 hours drive away. It was right out in the edge of the forest, and we only came into town once every fortnight.
Susan and I would have spent the better part of 6 months over that winter in a fiberglass dome, which was 9 feet, 3 metres diameter on the floor, so it just fitted a bed, like a double bed and a little bit of space for putting some clothes. And that had been salvaged. The fiberglass dome had been salvaged from a Navy ship where it covered all the radio gear on deck, but essentially it was right through the middle of winter. You know, we were sheltered by about 5 millimetres of fiberglass. And that was it. It was pretty cold.
I lived in a little tent next to the creek and with a tarp over the top, and had my kitchen set up. I had actually a wood stove out in the middle with a chimney going through the branches, and where I baked my bread. Yeah, it was pretty good lifestyle. Like I used to wash in the creek and see the honey possums at night in the moonlight. And the first thing I did there was build a garden, like a big garden, because I was really into growing things and having food from the earth rather than from the shop.
Wallace Greenham is an architect and town planner. In 1975, Wally and his family built several dwellings pertaining to Wally's personal and architectural philosophies. Wally and his family were not immune to criticism when they first arrived.
Rumours were going around about this hippie community and, you know, taking drugs and things like that, because we happened to be on a bush block away from the town. We decided to put a notice up downtown inviting people to come down for a cup of tea. Probably about 8 or 9 people came down, and we sat down having a cup of tea, and one couple said, you know, they'd like to offer an apology to us, and they said, we've heard all these rumours about this hippie community, and all we can find down here is a happy, contented family. We had to have this saw regulleted, and the only place that we could do it was the clean sawmill. So I took it around there, and they said, come back in about a week's time. So I went back and saw the saw doctor, and I said, is that saw ready? He said, yes. He said, it's over there in the corner. So I went over that corner, and I couldn't see it. I thought he put my name on it. And he said, that one there. And on it, and written on chalk, was King Hippie. I don't know what the normal population thinks that a hippie is, but you know, none of us were drinkers, none of us were in the dole, and we certainly didn't have anything to do with drugs.
So here I am, a man in my 30s, high 30s probably, and I was going down the road way out by Kentdale one day, and I had a guy with me who I'd been showing farms to, and there was a guy walking down the road. I thought, So you stop and pick this guy up and say, hey, you want to go? He said, yeah, I want to go down the road a bit. So I said, how far? He said, about 5 miles, so about 5 kilometres. And so he got into the car and I thought, what a strange smell. Anyway, 5 k's down the road, he said, oh, this will be here, stop here. And I thought, well, there's just bush here, nothing. And I said, you sure this is where you want to stop? Yes, this is where I want to stop. Okay, hop out. Off he went, and he trotted off into the bush. And I said to the guy, what was that very strange smell? And he looked at me and smiled and he said, you're not serious, are you?
The detectives in Albany put a raid in out around Walpole Way, okay, back out around like Kent River, and brought in three
truckloads, wasn't it?
Yeah, 3 10-tonne truckloads. Yeah. Huge trucks. And the plants were hanging right out the back of the trucks. So we're talking about dope plants that are probably 5-6 metres long. Threw them all in the burner. Said, Ken, can we burn all this? I said, fine. Chuck her in the burner. Piercy got a couple of drumloads of diesel, went up the top of the conveyor, poured it all over it, okay, and burnt it off. Anyway, the coppers all have a beer and see it smoking and burning away, and it's going through the mill and everybody's having a good time. Anyway, off they go back to Albany. Yeah. And that afternoon, Saturday morning, yeah. I go back into the mill Saturday morning, and there's all the boys lined up with their trailers, because this stuff didn't burn, dragging it out, taking it home. I said, you guys, you can't... Oh, it's all right, Ken. It's okay, don't worry about it.
And then, of course, the owners of the mill said, you know, we're not doing this anymore, so you'll have to find somewhere else to burn it. So they took it down the rubbish tip and put it in a hole in the rubbish tip, poured diesel on it and set a light to it, and then left. And somebody smelt it burning and went down there with a trailer and got a trailer load of marijuana for nothing, thank you very much. And it was all over the town for months.
I guess for me, homes were always important in terms of nurturing places to be. And I lived on houseboats and been part of big sailing boat syndicates. So I'd loved odd, crazy shapes with lots of wood and cute little corners. And I think I'd begun to sort of like mountain huts when I went climbing. And so when I came here, I suddenly found face cuts and poles and groovy things to build with. And I suddenly realised as I put my little first building up, and I didn't put the walls vertical, I had them at a slope, that this was possible to be as crazy as I wanted. And if I wanted a corner or a roof height to sit in, I kept always feeling, where do I want to be in this space? If I'm wanting to hide from the world and feel looked after, how do I want this to be? So all of a sudden I was into texture, rough timber straight from the mill, nothing finished off, no plaster, no paint, poles with irregular shapes and bits of branch sticking out that I could make into a staircase. Don't know where it came from. You know, you've got all these wonderful planks with grain and imperfections, and you make a house, and you can smell it, and you can touch it, and it's still got sap in it, and you can live within it, and it breathes with you. But I do know at the end of each exhausted day, I'd sit and think, this is like being inside my own head. Whatever I'm doing with this house, putting the roof on or finishing the walls, it's like actually being in my own head on a journey looking for shelter. So I guess building a house was adventure, self-discovery, and well, you know, when you're building it plank by plank, nail by nail, you can keep changing your mind. So I put plans in and I built differently, because that felt, I use that word, felt okay to do that.
like a lot of us people, we came into the area, we weren't even aware that you had to actually ask for permission to build, you know, like if you had a property, which I did, you thought, well, just build a shack, you know. So that's what we did.
And we expected to be kicked off and told that we couldn't be there. But we were very wicked. We didn't put in any applications. Probably shouldn't say this, should I now? Any building applications or anything.
This was when the rule of the West was the rule of the West, you know.
Dr. Jane James began her practice in Denmark in 1976 and quickly became known as the hippie doctor, possibly due to her preference for sporting bare feet, long hair and long dresses, and for encouraging her patients to eat bran.
I did obstetrics then, and that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that enormously. And my antenatal care list would go, and where are you living? In a shed, right. Do you have any lining? Oh, right. Do you have any heating? Do you have a toilet? Do you have any running water? Would you have a telephone?
At the time, there were a lot of illegal dwellings, and the Shire hired a helicopter to go around and look for them all.
The Shire president and the then building inspector decided to get on a helicopter and raid the whole district and find out where these hippies were, you know, hidden in the bush. Mm-hmm. And so they picked a whole heap of them, and the next day they went around and put demolition orders on their buildings.
And Terry came up and said that he'd found me on the aerial photograph, and he said, I never knew you were up here. And I said, well, here I am. So where's your toilet? And I showed him, and he said, you're not allowed to have compost toilets. And he stuck a writ on the door that said that the place wasn't fit for human habitation. And I'd have to find 7 days, find somewhere else to live. And I found a granny flat at the back of the house down on Inlet Drive. And the first time I used the toilet, it flooded up onto the lawn. It was a septic tank which was in clay, and they never work. So I rang the landlord, and he said, oh yeah, he said, I'll pay for it, but you have to get the truck to come in and pump it out. So I said, okay. So the truck came in, $128, and they pumped it out, and I jumped in the car and followed them. And where do you think they went? Do you know? There's a big pit at the rubbish tip. It's an open pit, no fence around it, nothing. And they just tipped all the shit in there. And when they were doing it, I'm standing there watching them, and when they were doing it, it was all running back on the tyres of the truck, all on their boots. It was disgusting. And then they left, and I jumped in the car and went back to the Shire office and said to the health inspector, I know where the shit truck dumps the shit, and I'm going home because a compost toilet is no more disgusting than that. And never got talked to by anybody ever again.
John Randall was the health inspector.
So he put in a raid on us and came screaming, driving up 1,000 miles up
at Christmas time across the paddock.
And you hippies are out here living with chooks running in and out of your house and living in squalor, and and so we said, well, hey, we're just ordinary people. We're out here doing our own thing, and showed him what we were doing, and talked to him, and tried to sound really normal, whatever normal is.
We explained to him, listen, we really weren't hippies, okay? That guy over there is a qualified chartered accountant.
Yes.
That young bloke over there, he's a qualified chartered accountant. That lady over there, she's a school teacher. Oh, and by the way, I've spent 7 years in the army, or I don't know about, and in the infantry. I never had dysentery. None of my troops ever had dysentery. Okay, so trust me, that's the best loo you'll ever find in Denmark.
Yeah, so, council then tried to put some pressure on some of those people to tidy up because there were health risks. There were hepatitis, there was a strain of resistant bacteria, that with outbreaks of boils with antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
The Shire decided to give all the newcomers an amnesty to actually come and talk to them about their plans and work through them and find a way, you know, where these buildings could be altered and we could keep living there and bring them in with the regulations.
Denmark had experienced newcomers before, but never a group so radically different in their approach to life. Everything about them was different: their homes, lifestyles, their values. Although the alternative lifestylers eventually became leaders in this community, their ideas were not readily accepted in the beginning, especially the concept of sharing land and houses.
We were sort of attracted to the idea of living close to people that we know and care for and that sort of thing. We sold our big house and put the money into buying this place. Then we set about drawing up a plan how to do a multiple occupancy. We didn't know the name then. Project. We call it a community. In 1978, when we put the proposal up to the Shire Council, they rejected it outright. I was at the meeting, and by the way some people were acting, they hadn't even read our proposal, because I think they thought we were bringing NIMB in to Denmark.
But for the locals, it was sort of a bit of a, what shall we say, a penny bomb, I suppose, in that nothing like that had ever happened around the place before, and it was totally, you know, a bit mind-boggling. We couldn't understand what was going on, I suppose.
Any sort of sharing of land, and it was sort of hippie-ish, and they thought we'd have drug plantations here and all that sort of thing, you know. One of the councillors said, you're in the Syrinx, you're okay, but it's all these other people you're getting in. You're opening the floodgates. And one councillor said, what I've got against your proposal is it's killing the profit motive. I said, how do you mean? He said, they're not owning the land, and so they can't make a profit on it when they sell, you know. I said, well, that's the idea.
It was a solidly based, professional dropout experience of trying to share land, work more cooperatively together, and work towards aspects of sustainability and environmental accountability. So it was a bunch of people who just simply wanted to live simply in that regard, who wanted to get out of the city. None of us really felt we were dropping out as such.
The entire Shire Council came out to have a tour. So one of our older buildings was a mill hut. So we hung out the big Australian flag on it to welcome them. And they walked around, looked at the different people's homemade buildings. We must have had 10 councillors here at that stage. And I really remember one bloke, they were all on the veranda of the tram. And one bloke he was very hefty built, and he leapt up and latched on to one of the beams and started swinging on the beam. And he said, oh, this is great, this is sturdy to me.
And the Wallery, I think, was a little bit like a resource centre. If you came down feeling a little bit lost in the building or being here process, you could find someone at the Wallery who was solid to talk to about what could be a good thing to do next.
The basic thing that we achieve by coming here is that you've got a group of people who are compatible with each other. They don't necessarily agree on everything.
But we came, we learned whole new skills, we built houses, we had our kids, and it was a very good place to live. And many people that came down in the early days are still there, because it is such a good way for people to begin life somewhere else. No high mortgage, you know, you paid your entrance fee of a few $1,000s, you built cheaply.
It's a great experience, you know, being part of this intentional community we have here and the greater community of Denmark and for its people. What we do here on this intentional community, the Wallery, is a living experiment, and it's not everyone's cup of tea. I mean, none of us here saw ourselves, I suppose, as hippies. I mean, if anything, I came here to drop in, not to drop out.
What the Wallery has done, in a sense, is that all people's fears have disappeared. All these forecasts of they used to call it the 5 Ds, There's dogs, dirt, disease, dull bludgers, and depravity. We're all going to spread around the whole district if you don't watch out. Well, none of it's happened.
For many of the new settlers, Denmark was far from being a haven to drop out in. They embraced several causes, culminating in 1984 with the most divisive issue Denmark had ever seen.
Now there is a proposal to increase the destruction of native forests, this time on private property. McLean Sawmills of Denmark want to export up to 240,000 tonnes of hardwood chips per year, gained from farmland in the Denmark, Albany, Manjimup, Plantagenet and other shires, as far north as Perth.
I can thank the late Gordon McLean, ex-mill owner, for introducing me to the environment, because he had a proposal back in about 86, 87. He put up a proposal for an export wood chip project based on the resource in Denmark.
The McLean's mill, which was a very efficient milling operation that was surviving on salvaging logs from state forest that the big millers, that is Millers and Whitakers, would leave behind.
That mill could cut wood from what was virtually the waste of other mills. And their recovery rates were phenomenal. There was some very brilliant benchmen up there.
Gordon McLean and his crew would pull the rubbish logs sometimes up to 150 k's away back to Denmark, and would mill these. You'd see these logs come in on, half rot.
As Greenies, we were very conscious of that. We weren't critical of Gordon McLean at all.
As time went on, the distance to get the logs got bigger and bigger, and so it wasn't economic anymore to bring logs in from such transport them such long distances. So he put up a proposal to log the residual forests on private land.
And for the local Greenies, it was pretty daunting piece of work. Now, I'd come from uni, from working on a PhD, and it was like, oh, I can do this. So I immediately dropped into working on a big submission.
We've amassed all this information. I've got an electric typewriter, but oh God. And along came this skinny little bloke called Simon Neville, fresh into town, and said, I've got a computer. So that was the beginning of the technological era in Denmark.
Bringing Apple Macs along was actually really significant, because a lot of people went, wow, you can do all that stuff on that little boxy machine.
So Simon, of course, with a degree in geography, and his partner Louise, who was an environmentalist and also with qualifications, just appeared on the scene at exactly the right time, so away we went.
The last remnants, they're the pieces that weren't too easily cleared, and now there's obviously somebody who thinks they can make use of them and will probably put the land in great danger. These ones here are up in the Carry incidents, I can see that.
Woe betide those who want to stop on the bridge or stop anywhere near the bridge, the only bridge across the river anywhere nearby.
And we just took their proposal to pieces, step by step. And we produced a really impressive document. Probably, well, it would have been by far at that stage the biggest response to any environmental project that had probably ever been done in WA, let alone in the southwest. And it made quite an impact.
And I just can't see the farmers in the area, hard pressed as they are, allowing their forest to be chopped down and then replanted again. And the comments that I've heard from people who've talked to farmers and from my conversations myself is that Gordon McLean's scheme is going to be used as a land clearance scheme.
A lot of the resource that McLean's were claiming existed that would support this project actually was on roads and bodies of water and grasslands and swamps and whatever. So we very quickly realised that the whole project was a furphy.
How could you possibly risk setting up an industry if it's like putting all your eggs into one basket? Everything's dependent upon wood chipping. The export market has a hiccup in 5 years down the line, and the whole base of our economy is finished.
That really polarized the community. So it was very much an us against them thing. It was your classic environmentalists against, rational economists.
In the middle of it, we had the local shire, the local council, who was, sort of supportive of business. You could sort of see, you can see the figures. If you've got a mill that employs 40 or 50 guys, and they paid this amount of money in wages every week, there's this definite figure that you've got. Whereas environment values, you can't sort of say, well, there's the figure that it's worth, per year to Denmark.
The mill wasn't going very well, so there was people involved with the mill, and they all wanted the project to go because it would keep the mill running. There were a lot of tradies who had come down to make a life surfing and was sort of a part of the town. There were the old style salt of the earth farmers and so on, and there were all the alternatives.
Yeah, there was concern and from families that, bloody greenies are going to close the mill, we'll all be out of work, what on earth are we going to do now? And so I remember Andrew, who was my partner at the time, and myself going on this mission to find out how you could use, do other things like craft work. We could find out that you can make things out of red gum, everybody.
There were marches in the street, both by workers from the mill and by environmentalists, literally marches, with banners and TV cameras and so on.
We used to come into town during a protest to buy some food, and people would, they would say like, "Oh, go on, let's get the chainsaws out, let's cut those trees down," just to antagonize us, and it was pretty antagonistic, it was pretty heavy stuff, like the whole mobs being taken off in police cars to police stations. It was warfare.
And I myself got very uptight and realized that even if you were right, if you are polarizing a community, nobody wins.
I think it came to a head when there was a big meeting in the town hall, and it was pretty much divided evenly between those who were supportive of a proposal for further wood chipping and those opposed. And I thought, this is not healthy. This is not a healthy thing for a community.
And so somewhere in there I realized that this local battle had actually created a lot of bad feelings. So we created an event called the Celebration of the Trees. And again, we got the indigenous people involved. And we held it right in the middle of Denmark. And we invited everybody. We invited all the people who stood for wood chipping, and all the people who stood for forest products, and all the people who are pushing for more timber milling. And we invited all the environmentalists. And we just made it a celebration, and we gave everybody a chance to give their views and say where they were coming from, and to actually meet each other face to face and actually shake hands and say, hey, I live around the corner from you. And for me, that was a wonderful thing to do, and it helped me come to terms with my own us against them, and to realize that if you're fighting against anything, you're just creating more of the same destructive energy. So it was a lesson for myself personally, and it was also, I think, very helpful for the community.
And that was one of our missions, really, some of us, was to build bridges, not to cause division by being the hardline greenie, this, that and the other thing, whatever you want to say. But to say, okay, we're all on the planet together, let's bloody have a good time and enjoy it while we're all still here, not stab each other in the back.
A year or so of heavy campaigning, which involved all sorts of people, taught me two things. One, if you believe in something passionately enough and you think you're right, you can make a difference, because it was the first time in the history of this country when an export wood chip project actually got bounced by the feds.
That proposal would have seen a lot of privately owned forests get chipped, and that forest is part of the backbone of Denmark.
I can remember the headlines in the paper, because the mill was closing down, Denmark was going to die, and everybody would move away, and it didn't happen.
The Mungers, or the tree huggers, had a substantial win. because the mill had gone, the wood chip had gone. Okay, we were shutting down the state forests. Okay, so we were moving into this new era, new time for Denmark.
Despite the dole-bludging, dope-smoking layabout reputation, many of these newcomers were skilled artisans and professionals. Their fresh, entrepreneurial approach began to revitalise the local economy in new and unexpected ways.
We've got in Denmark, just this small town, alone we've got 10 wood craftsmen. They're using just about every wood that you can imagine. Tingle, red gum, banksia, she oak, jarrah and carry.
These alternative types also spearheaded the genesis of cultural or artistic tourism. On one of my trips home, Mum told me about this group calling themselves Denmark Arts Council.
As country towns go, they don't come much prettier or quieter than Denmark in southwest Western Australia. If the events of last weekend are anything to go by, they don't come much crazier either.
I started thinking, well, we should have a convention, an artistic type convention, and I went through all the possibilities. And clowns happened because I was looking for something that everybody would like and the kids would enjoy and it wouldn't be threatening.
We had things like clowns conventions, which were wonderfully archaic and alternative and clearly upset and made uncomfortable some local people because we were beginning to be called a clown town. And maybe we were.
Well, everyone thought we were the clown town.
And we were, yeah. We were being run by bloody hippies.
What more can I say?
For years now, the people of Denmark and the alternative lifestylers who flocked to the town have been at arm's length. Tom's sister, Denmark Shire president and farmer, admits that changing attitudes towards people who'd spend a year organising a clowns convention has been hard.
I think it would be fair to say that there's been a certain amount of reluctance on their part to accept them. But I also think it would be fair to say that that is vanishing.
What's making it vanish?
General acceptance that there is, amongst those people that come to live in this town, to enjoy its beauty, a great deal of talent.
So it was a gradual enriching of what we were doing, where the town was forced to take notice, forced to be involved, forced to either like it or hate it, but either way, acknowledge that it was here.
A lot of the local community was against it, were not happy with it. I was against it.
Then we heard there was a petition of 137 signatures objecting to us them being called Clown Town because they thought it reflected on them that they would be called clowns. I mean, they were calling us hippies.
People felt that they were being made a bit of fun of, that Denmark wasn't seen seriously.
We attracted a lot of clowns to Denmark that wouldn't leave. They thought they'd found home.
That was just a joyous, happy event, and everybody could be silly and not take themselves seriously for a while. So I marked that down as one of the key turning points that actually helped to make a homogeneous community, if you like, and then all the work that went into, so-called newcomers working on local groups, P&C, etc. All that kind of came together, and things started to change somewhere in the mid-'80s, and people started to listen to each other, and I think the community really benefited from that.
I remember coming back to town at one stage and feeling like I really didn't fit in anymore with my short, cropped red hair. When I ran into an old schoolmate of my brother's, he told me that he and other store owners in town were worried about these hippies that were running markets down in the park. And I asked him why he didn't like the markets, and he said, "Oh, we don't want them taking business away from us."
The very first memory of the arts people, of the hippies at the Arts Council markets was walking amongst all the crowd and the different stalls and coming across groups sitting on the ground with all their dogs and little boxes of chooks and eggs and fruit and whatever else that they happened to be selling at the time, having just a very relaxed day at the market. We're all a bit shocked at first.
The market day was modelled on the idea of the Fremantle markets, which I'd been to and was most impressed with, because what was easy about that was that it was individual stallholders. When you bring them all together, you got all these people involved and all the people they know. So we didn't need an audience, we had one already.
After about the second or third market day, the Chamber of Commerce wanted to close them down because the shops were so worried that the market day would take away all the profit that they might get. It must have been a very small profit. They were really worried about their own survival. It was a very worrying time. We probably did it all the wrong way round, with lack of consultation, because we just wanted to do it. We're here. We thought we were God's gift to mankind, I think.
We had local shops trying to stop us. They thought we would take away their business. And when you look back on that, it's kind of difficult to see because, the town has benefited immensely.
Way down south, amongst the trees, buzzing around with the honeybees, there are some cats who hold the keys. The cats is swinging from the trees. Deep in the heart of the Rainbow Coast, there is a place that's got the most. Got a lot of green trees to boast. Let's take this time to raise a toast to the good news that we're bringing. While freedom's bells, hear them ringing. Whoa, we're singing. And you know that the cats is swinging. And buzzing around with the honeybee. Wow. There's a spirit that we must appease. Wow. Swinging the hips and shaking the knees. The cats is swinging, swinging from the trees.
When did you come to Denmark?
23 years ago now.
What did you love about it when you saw it?
I think what made me stay was housewarming, and there was about 10 people, and they held hands and they shared from their heart and sang songs. And I looked up at the stars and I looked at the fire and I looked at those people and I said I could live here.
And has it changed much, do you think, since then?
Oh yes, it's changed. I find the community is much more scattered, and I'd like to see it come back together more. I feel there's a lot of cliques now, and there's still lots of creativity, but I really miss that circle that we used to have.
Do you think other hippies have sold out? Become straight and boring?
I think they bowed to pressure, yes. I think they thought they needed to be something different or to fit in or because I get that thing. Oh, look at you, you're still living in the 60s. Well, the 60s was a good time.
Yeah.
It was an amazing time, so even though I'm not living there, why not embrace the things that I enjoy? Yeah, that's what I think anyway.
I was curious, of course, about all this arty activity, and slowly but surely I went from vowing and declaring that I could never return to Denmark to thinking of it as a place I could actually make a life in. By the time I came back to live in Denmark in 1996, as a second wave hippie artist, I seemed to fit right in with the alternative types and found a niche for myself in the community as an artist, arts worker and teacher. However, I also felt connected to and sympathised with the old farmers and business people who were my parents' friends. I was able to bridge two subcultures and found the stories each group had were crucial to my understanding of how the town had developed its current identity. The mill workers and farmers hadn't gone, they'd just moved sideways a little bit, albeit reluctantly, to accommodate the new left.
So Denmark has changed from being almost a 100% rural / horticulture society into probably one of the most diverse societies in context of small towns.
And so it's no longer primary industry based. In fact, it's primarily tourism and education and secondary service sectors that are the basis of Denmark. And the type of people in those sectors are much more open. In fact, they've often chosen to come to Denmark because of a lifestyle choice, or because they like the type of community we've become. There's also quite a few who I think don't in any way understand or share some of the types of values that have been shaped over the 80s and 90s.
A kind of environmental ethos grew very strongly in Denmark, sort of demonstrated by the Environment Centre, by the environment groups, Green Skills, all the groups that grew out of that, and they've been actually set a national standard for environmental care and proactive work, tree planting, looking after water catchments. So I think that the people who've moved here have had an immense impact.
The ideas we had have become mainstream. I think that the average person wants to keep the environment.
From an ex-timber miller who was gladly cutting up carry trees and sending them off to market, I think they are probably one of the greatest assets we can retain in our shire. Okay, I agree with that. But everything to be balanced against whether or not you remove a tree for progress I think there's got to be some common sense there.
What I think has happened is that a lot of us who came from that alternative background have put a great deal of effort in trying to build positive initiatives that are win-wins for the local economy and society as well, and that over the years has borne a lot of fruit. So the Shire's council staff, the councillors, the small business leaders have seen and got to know us and me, and seen that we actually aren't unreasonable, that we often do listen, and that we actually have lots to agree about in terms of community development.
There's always going to be differences of opinion. It's working through that is the important thing. And I think it's important that people see that there are other opinions, and that you just accept, okay, I might not have your value system, we might not agree on this, but I find there's always something that you can actually click and agree about, or have something in common with people, and you can show respect and get on. And I think you have to do that in a small town.
Denmark's recent escalating population suggests yet another new wave of urban refugees who bring with them a different set of ideas, skills and values.
The culture of Denmark is multifaceted. And the challenge, I think, in terms of the future of it, is how do you get each of those facets communicating together so that the culture builds on itself. So if the culture of Denmark is like rings on a tree, you don't cut out a ring when the tree grows, you build on a ring. And so timber, agriculture, art, tourism, they're all expanding. And that's, for me, the culture of Denmark is strongest when we can be talking with each other and communicating and building those rings. Then we get a really solid trunk.
One of the big things now is that there's a lot of people in Denmark for the money. And I think that's one of the things that really saddens me. So when we know people who are on the council who are constantly battling off things that aren't really in the spirit of what we knew Denmark to be. And I think what a lot of the early people, not necessarily greenies, but the early people. I mean, for us, 25 years of change in town, it's like gradually losing the use of one leg. Eventually it's pretty horrible in the end, but you sort of didn't notice it until one day you squatted down to fix a sprinkler and you realised you couldn't get up again. That's it. You're buggered, your legs are knackered. And you think, how did that happen? And in Denmark, the same sort of thing's going to happen, you know. We're gradually losing vegetation along the inlet. We may be losing the beautiful, isolated, wonderful bits of beach where you can, if you want, walk and just go, oh, this is so divine. Will there be a road there if we're not careful? And you go, when did that road come in?
And so for me, one of the greatest challenges is how do we allow new people that are moving in, how do we instill them in the fundamental, quintessential Denmark way? And I think we have something that's incredibly special here. And I mean, wouldn't it be lovely to be able to say for every newcomer, here's your welcome pack, and these are things you need to know about Denmark, because this is how we do it down here.
I'm not opposed to people coming here. I mean, some people react against that, oh, there's more people. Well, that's natural that people are going to come here. I mean, they're going to come here for the same reasons we did, a lot of them. You have to expect that. It's just that as long as we look after our resources that are limited, that we make decisions that are appropriate for our community.
We came here, so other people want to come here. And they come here now, and quite often those developments are on open land. How can you complain about that? And they all grow trees.
All the subdivisions that are in Denmark didn't exist 20 years ago, so that's had a huge impact. It's had a huge impact on Wilson Inlet and all the catchment area, on the forest, on the land, on the ocean beach corridor. In fact, every direction you go in, you will find property development. And it's not wise property development. It's not sustainable.
It's a fantasy to think that we can consider Denmark to be a sustainable town when we're 500 kilometres from the nearest factory and we're dependent on trucks. And until we have some transformative change in this place, and I reckon it's not going to be the hippies that have done this. I reckon it's going to be a different breed of people that will come in and say, no, we have to put in place some changes that will make us more sustainable. We will be forced to localise, and then some of the skills that we've developed, or residual skills that we have as old hippies and things like that, will become really, really important, like being able to build your own houses, set them up independently powered, grow your own food, and we've done that stuff. But we won't do it voluntarily. We're going to go get dragged kicking and screaming into kind of a genuinely sustainable, decentralised local economy.
So I think it's constant vigilance. It's about empowering involvement at the community level, that groups, particularly the civic sector, retain a very important role in helping guide Denmark into the coming decades. The other side of that, though, is that it's actually a very interesting place, an exciting place for people to express their potential. So it's a wonderful place for artists, or indeed people from across the spectres, whether it's sporting or cultural or environmental, to make their dreams come true. You know, you can actually do it here. We've built the facilities and we've built the institutions and the groups and the linkages and the skills. So it's like a canvas where you can create your life or paint the sort of things you want, provided it's compatible with the type of values that we've tried to make as broad, you know, as cement in, as that these are the values of our community.
I love living in a town that's, that values its surroundings, and that is so creative in terms of its markets and market days and music and art, painting, those sorts of things. I think we're so lucky. Yeah.
The role of the alternative lifestylers in creating Denmark's current identity has been crucial. And like the mill workers and farmers, the old hippies haven't left us. They're still here, maintaining the values they helped put into place.
I look at, that 30 years ago where the hippies moved in. One of the different things about them to say what you might have with urban refugees is that in actual fact, their values weren't based around, I need more.
For those of us who have come here for our lifestyle, for our well-being, we don't really measure our success in terms of material well-being. We measure it in terms of whether we are doing things that are meaningful in our lives, that we have truly happiness, that the environment's not being destroyed around us, that it's going to be there for our children, their children, in a way that all of their opportunities and the opportunities for all of living beings, sentient beings as the Buddhists would say, are going to be intact.
I wanted to be engaged. That's why I came here.
If anything, I came here to drop in, not to drop out.
The hippies have always been right from way, way back.
We need more hippies, you know. If hippies means caring, then, you know, let's have them. Bring them on in massive numbers.